Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of Shmuel Aleph, the first book of Samuel. We are up to chapter 25. We completed the last chapter where we had this incredible encounter between Saul, and David, where David had the chance to easily kill Saul and end his life of running as a refugee, as a wanted fugitive, and possibly even take over the kingdom for himself. But David, in his incredibly noble and magnanimous act, David chose to leave Saul alone, to allow him to leave in safety, and simply because David did not want his leadership, his monarchy, to begin in violence, to begin with murder, and to begin by killing the king of the people of Israel, which Saul at the time still was. This was a tremendous act and told us so much about who David was. This next chapter, the one that we're about to study, gives us a little bit of a different side of David. We're going to learn that David was, although he acted nobly and acted morally and ethically in the appropriate way in the previous story, David was not a wimp, so to speak. He was not a pushover, and when justice mattered for his people, when it wasn't just a personal issue, but when it mattered for his people, David was perfectly willing to stand up and fight when it was necessary for justice. And this we're going to read about in this coming chapter of 25. So again, all of these stories help us understand and help us get a glimpse of just who David was and why he was chosen as the first king of Israel. And all of the stories actually that we're going to read about David in his early days, before he was king, while he was a fugitive, and then as he became king, we're going to get a sense of who he was and what his character traits were that made him the leader and the founder of the dynasty that was to lead the people of Israel into the future and indeed until the end of times. Vayomas Shmuel, it starts off with one verse referring to the death of Shmuel, the death of Samuel. Samuel being the venerable sage, the leader, the one that anointed Saul, the one that anointed David, the one that he himself, before the anointing of a king of Saul, was the leader of the people, was the judge, the final of the period of judges, and the one who gave birth to the period of monarchy. Shmuel passed away, vayikavtzu chol Yisrael vayispidulu, and all of the people of Israel, presumably Saul and David. It says all of Israel came and they eulogized him. Vayikpiruhu beveiso b'Ramah, and he was buried in his home in Ramah. This doesn't necessarily mean in his house. When it says in his home, it means in his home place, his hometown, which is Ramah, which we've heard about many times. Vayokam David, and presumably after the period of mourning was over, David got up, left that place, Vayered al Midbar Paran, and he went down to the wilderness of Paran. There's several mentions of the Midbar Paran, the wilderness of Paran, in the Torah that we find while the people of Israel were wandering in the wilderness. This is not the same Midbar Paran. This Midbar Paran is in the land of Israel. Now, what we're about to, David now took on the life of a Bedouin. He led his people while Saul remained the king. David was in the wilderness leading his band of supporters. The type of justice which was accepted among the I call them Bedouin tribes because that's something the most familiar that we can compare it to today. These were people that mostly made their living off of their animals, their sheep. Also, they might have done some agriculture as well, but primarily they were shepherds, and primarily they raised sheep and goats, sold the wool, etc. And this is how they made their living, and they wandered through the wilderness. V'ish b'Ma'on, there was a man in a place called Ma'on, u'ma'aseu v'Carmel, and his possessions were in Carmel. So Carmel is an area in northern Israel where there was pasture for the sheep to to go. So the man himself lived in Ma'on, and his sheep wandered in pasture, presumably led by his shepherds, by his workers. V'aish gadol ma'od. He was a big man. Literally, gadol here is referring to presumably his wealth. He was a wealthy man. Velo, so it wasn't talking about his physical size. Velo tzon shloshet alafim, and he had many sheep. He had 3,000 sheep. V'elef izim, and he had 1,000 goats. So he was a wealthy man. When it came time to shear his sheep, he had a lot of money coming in. Vahi bigzoz estonova Carmel, and it was when it was time. This story occurred when it was time to shear the sheep in Carmel. V'shem ha'ish Naval, and the name of the man was Naval. Now Naval, for those that are familiar with the Hebrew language, Naval is a name, but it also means the best translation I've seen is a boor, Boor, a lowly, non-pleasant man, a bully almost, but just a not nice person, disgusting person. V'shem ishto Avigail, and the name of his wife was Avigail. Now Avigail is a very beautiful name. It means my father, which is a reference to God, brings joy. So God brings joy. So we have a man and a woman with very different names, and as we'll see in the story, also very different personalities. V'ha'isha, and the verse here tells us right away, V'ha'isha tovas sechel, she was a very intelligent woman, v'fat toar, and a very beautiful woman. So she was both an intelligent, and it doesn't see, when it describes her intelligence, it says tovat sechel. She was of good intelligence. It uses the language of good, meaning she was a not just smart, but very moral, ethical, good person, v'fat Torah, and also a beautiful woman. V'ya'ish kasheh, but the man was a very stubborn man, a hard man, v'ram alalim, and his deeds were evil, v'hu chalibi, and he was a descendant of Kalev, of Caleb. This is not very a badge of honor for Caleb to have a descendant like this, but this was the story. Vayishma David bamidbar, and David heard in the wilderness. David was a band living in the wilderness. Ki gozez Naval etzono, that Naval was shearing his sheep. It was shearing time, which was a time of great joy. It's time to accumulate. Now, all the product that they've been raising all of these months is now time to shear the sheep, sell the wool, and presumably make a lot of money. Now, before I continue, it's important to give a little introduction to what the Bedouin law was, and if I'm not mistaken, having seen this in several places, still is in parts of the world. It's understood that when people in the desert when someone is shepherding their sheep, when the Bedouin is shepherding their sheep throughout the hills and mountains and fields and valleys of the wilderness area, obviously they're very susceptible to numerous dangers. Danger of predators, animal predators could come attack the sheep. And this is the job of the shepherd is, of course, not only to bring his sheep to good pasture so that they get to eat and good water, they get to drink and make sure that they are cared for, but also to protect them from these kinds of threats, but also from human predators, robbers, thieves, bandits that have every reason to try and steal the sheep, etc. When there are people out in the fields that do not that act in such a way that they ward off the evildoers, ward off these bandits, and keep them away and help keep the sheep safe, even though they weren't officially hired by the owner of the sheep. It's understood that when there's peaceful people out there, there's a form of protection that they give to the sheep, which is very important, which is very valuable. People's presence also protects the sheep from predators, animals, etc. So it was accepted norm, and that when if there's a band of people out there who, rather than harass the shepherds and the sheep, they protected them, that they would get repaid for their kindness when it came the time to shear the sheep. This was just understood. This was the way that it was then. Without signing any official contracts or being hired or being officially guardians of the sheep. It was accepted that they would get some repayment for being peaceful, for not harassing the sheep, but instead providing some form of protection. Just people in general around that allow the sheep to graze and allow the sheep to peacefully go about their business. That in it of itself is considered a benefit to the owner of the sheep. So Vayishlach David asara na'arim, and therefore David sent 10 of his young boys that were with him. Vayomer David la na'arim, and David gave them instructions when he sent them and told them as follows: Alu Carmela, go up to Carmel, right, which is where the sheep are going to be sheared. Uvasem el Naval, and I want you to come to Naval. Ushaltem lo vishmi l'shalom, and when you get to him, I want you to greet him in my name in peace. Greet him nicely. Say, hey, we are here as messengers of David, and we come in peace. Amartem kol l'choy, and I want you to say to him, so it is for life. Kol l'choy, right? Or it's almost like similar to the way we say l'chaim. L'choy is to life, right? To happiness, to life, to joy. This is a wonderful time. V'atah shalom, and you have peace for yourself, uveischa shalom, and peace for your home. Obviously, this is a very wonderful time to see all of the fruits of his labor, all of the profits from his products. V'chol asher l'cha shalom, and everything that you have, shalom, should be at peace. So this is a wonderv'ul verse. V'amartem kol l'choy v'atah shalom uveitcha shalom, so on. Everything peace and beautiful and wonderful. This is a time of very great joy. V'atah, and I heard, now, shamati, I have heard, he goes to Zimlach, that now they are preparing the shearing time. Ata haroim asher locha hayu imanu, right? Now, you are doing the shearing now, and haroim asher locha, and the shepherds that are your shepherds that work for you, hayu imanu, they were with us. When they were out in the wilderness, and you were back home in your house, right? They were out in the wilderness with us. Lo hechlamnum, we didn't shame them, right? V'lo nifkad lahem, we didn't hurt them. V'lo nifkad lahem u'uma, there was not a single thing of theirs that we ever took. We protected them rather than harassed them. Kol yemei heyosam Carmel, all of the time that they were shepherding their sheep throughout the fields and mountains of the Carmel. Sha'alet na'arecha, and if you want verification of this fact, obviously you weren't out there, you were sitting in the comfort of your home while all this was going on. So go ahead, ask your boys, v'yagidu lach, and they will tell you. V'yimtzu hana'arim chen be'einecha. So therefore, once you verify this, I want you to remember these other boys speaking to Naval in the name of David, and this is what David is instructing them to say. So v'yimtzu, and then these boys, in other words, us, should find favor in your eyes, ki al yom tov banu, because we came on a wonderful day, a happy day, a day of celebration. Tinana, give us esh asher timsa yodcha la'avodecha, that which you can afford, or that which you desire to give to your servants, ulevincha leDavid, and to your son David. In other words, David presenting himself in a humble way, but saying, we're due some kind of reward for this, some food, some money, some maybe some animals to eat, etc., some of the wool to sell, right? This was the accepted custom in those days, and David fully expected Naval to live up to what was expected of him. Vayava'u na'arei David, and David's boys came. Vayidabru el Naval kechol hatorim ha'ele b'shem David vayanuchu, and they spoke this whole speech as they were instructed, just as they were in the name of David, vayanuchu, and then they finished their speech, waiting for an answer. We're up to verse 10. Vayan Naval et Ave David vayomer. And Naval answered the servants of David, and he said and follows: Mi David, who is this David guy? Mi ben Ishai, who is this son of Jesse? Who is this? Hayom rabu avodim hamisportzim ish mipnei adonav. There are so many servants that run away from their masters. This is clearly a reference to the fact that David used to be a servant at the court of the king, Saul, and he ran away into the field. So who is he? He's a nothing. He's a nobody. He's just a fugitive running away from the king. There's tons of slaves running around the wilderness that escaped their masters. He belongs back with his master. V'lokachti et lachmi, that I should take my bread, verse 11, vet meimai, and my water, v'et tivchasi, and my slaughtered animals, my meat, asher tafachti legozazoi, that I slaughtered to feed those that are doing my shearing, v'nosatila anoshim asher lo yadati, and I should give them to men that I don't even know, emi zehema, I don't even know where they come from. This was his response. Very not appreciative, very inappropriate. Now remember, David was not just fighting for his own honor here. He was asking for his men, for his people, right, their due for what they had done this whole time. So when you hurt David's people, David's response is going to be very different from when David was being attacked personally, when we saw his response to Saul. Vayafchuna arei David ledarkam. David's young men turned and left their way. They turned back. Vayashuvu, they returned to David. Vayavo, and they got there. Vayagidu lo kechol advar ma'ila, and they told him everything that had happened. Vayomer David la'an ashav. David said immediately to his men, "This is not tolerable. Chigru ishet charbo, put on your swords." That's it. David, the warrior, is now fighting for the honor of his men. Vayachgeru ishet charbo, they each put their swords on. Vayachgor dam David et charbo, and David also put on his sword. Vayalu acharei David, and they followed after David. Karba meot, each approximately 400 men. Umasayim yashvu al akelim, and approximately 200 men stayed with their things to guard the camp to make sure that they weren't. If they all would have left, then no one would have stayed home to watch the things. So, Vila Avigail eshet Naval. Now, Abigail, who was the wife of Naval, Higid nar echad me hanaorim lemar. One of the young men from the boys said as follows. Hine shalach David malachim. So one of the young men that was there at when David's men spoke to Naval and heard what happened, he went to Naval's wife and told her, Hine shalach David malachim mehamidbar. David sent messengers from the Midbar, from the wilderness, Livarechet Adonenu, to give blessings to our master, to Naval, right? They came in peace, they blessed him, Vayat bohem, but he chucked them out, he spit them out. Vayat means he spurned them, is the best translation I've seen. V'anashim tovim lanu miod, and the truth is that these people were right. They deserved to get something. They deserve to be treated better because they were very good to us. They didn't hurt us. There wasn't a single thing missing. Every single one of our sheep and goats were taken care of. They didn't steal anything. They didn't take anything. They didn't hurt anything. All the time that we were with them, when we were there with them in the field. And this was very important because until now, from their words, all they were saying is that David didn't hurt them. Not hurting them doesn't gain you any special prize, even though in Bedouin justice it did. But he emphasizes they were like a wall for us. In other words, they protected us. Gam laila gam yomam, nights and days. Kol yimei usanu imam roim, so on all those days that we were with them shepherding the sheep. So they protected us. In other words, they deserve some much better treatment than that. They deserve something from this bounty. And now, di'i urei ma ta'asi. You need to know this, and you have to see and think what it is that you are going to do. Because this young man realized that Naval had done a very stupid move, starting up with David, and that he's getting himself into some steep trouble. And kol sohara, and the evil, bad, and danger is and harm is threatening us against our master V'al Beso and his entire house, all of us who are his servants, his family. V'hu ben Belial midaber elav, and he was just such a ben Belial is a gruff and arrogant, punk or a nobody from the way he spoke to him. In other words, the way Naval, your husband, spoke to him was like a Ben Belial. He was just a terrible, awful person, the way he spoke to him, and he's going to pay for it, and we're all going to pay for it. So think about it, he told Abigail. Think about some response that you could say. Vatimaher Abigail, so Abigail rushed. Vatikach Mosayim Lechem, and she took 200 loaves of bread, Ushnayim Nivle Yayin, and 2 jugs or barrels of wine, v'chamesh tzon, and 5 sheep asuyos that were prepared, in other words, slaughtered and cooked and ready, v'chamesh si'im kali, and 5 saw, those are measures of dried grain, in other words, like to eat, ume'atzi mukim, and 100 cakes of dried out grapes like raisins, umasayim develim, and 200 cakes of figs, vatosim alach amorim, and she loaded them onto donkeys. Vatomer lina areha, and she said to her young men, Ivru lefanai, I want you to pass in front of me. Hineni acharechem ba, I will be coming after you. Uli isha Naval lo higida, and she did not tell her husband Naval what she was doing. V'haisa hi rocheves al achamar, and she was riding on the donkey. V'yoredet b'seiser hahar, and she was going down. B'seiser hahar could be translated as a trail on the hill, but it also means being hidden by the hill in such a way that Naval wouldn't be able to see her. V'hinei David va'anashav yordim likrasa, and David and his men were coming down. Apparently, they were on the way to Naval, coming down the mountain. Vatifgosh hosam, and she met them. This is going to conclude the first half of chapter 25. I'll stop here, and we'll complete this chapter. We'll see what happened with the encounter between Abigail and David, and we'll continue from here in the next chapter. Thank you so much for studying chapter 25 together with me, part A. Looking forward to studying part B together, and of course the rest of this beautiful book of Samuel.